You are listening to the Getting Lucky podcast. I am the professional elite. I am Lucky Robert Curtis. Joining me for the first part of the show is English Thom Burton, the conductor of mixed martial arts. Say hello to the people.
Hey guys, what's happening?
All right, so we've got a massive show today. In the first part, we're going to talk TUF Smashes finale. We've got a couple interviews with the fighters on that card, and then in the second half, we're going to bring in my other co-host, and we're going to talk about TUF 16. I figured it was appropriate for me to bring English Thom on this because he's English, British, and I'm an expat living in Australia. I'm still an American citizen, but I live in Australia, so I figured why not have Tommy and I talk about this. And I didn't really catch this off the bat. Maybe it's because I'm not native Australian, but TUF Smashes is a playoff of the Ashes, which is a cricket contest between England and Australia. I've watched the Ashes on TV, but it didn't ever occur to me until I read it that it was actually supposed to be a pun. I thought maybe the Smashes was like some sort of English slang for getting into fights. I don't know. I fully admit to that.
No, I mean, I didn't expect you, an expat, to really understand it, but there's generally been this sporting rivalry for the past century, pretty much. I mean, the Ashes itself, it's almost a century old, and the Test Series trophy that they win, the original Ashes, where it's a small mahogany trophy with the original cricket stumps. The Australians won, and they took the wickets, which are those, the stumps that are at the end of in the field, and they burned them, and then they put it in the trophy. And for the past century, we've been fighting with the Australians for control of it, and it's the most expensive trophy in the world, the most valuable.
They burned them, or they smoked them?
I think they just burned them.
I think this is Australia we're talking about. Hydroponics, very popular. Before we get into the show, there are 2 more seasons of The Ultimate Fighter already in production. Ultimate Fighter 17, Jon Jones versus Chael Sonnen. That's probably going to be a very exciting season. Jon Jones is one of the most unlikable champions that we've ever had, and Chael Sonnen has the gift of gab, as my grandmother might say. The other season is the return of TUF Brazil. A lot of crying in those. This is Fabricio Verdum versus Big Nog. TUF 17 is doing middleweights, and TUF Brazil 2 is doing welterweights. And surprisingly, counting that season, they've done welterweights 9 times. They've done lightweights, I believe, 6 times. But the divisions that are weakest right now, the light heavyweights, in my opinion, they've only done 3 times. So maybe it's time to bring out some bigger fighters, because the welterweights and lightweights and middleweights are pretty deep. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they also need to do some more bantamweights as well. And with the new women's division, they definitely need to do a women's TUF.
They absolutely need to do a women's TUF. Here's the thing. When women cohabitate, it gets really nasty. That show would be brilliant even if there wasn't fighting.
I think they'd be fighting more than the men, actually.
I really think so. There'd be talking behind people's backs. There'd be the PMS episode. Mm-hmm. Oh, God. I wonder when women get into street fights, even if they're mixed martial artists, if they still pull hair. I bet you they do.
Yeah, I bet. I'll bet you they scratch each other as well.
Oh, ooh, I can't wait. All right. So, 2 more seasons on the way. There's also talk of another Ultimate Fighter, another international version of the Ultimate Fighter. I don't know if they're going to keep doing UK versus Australia. Personally, I don't know if it's very fair, because if you take the entire United Kingdom, which is, no, you're going to be impressed here, Tom, which is Wales, England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. Am I right?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. If they take all of the United Kingdom, that's 62 million people. You take Australia, 20 million people. Not to mention, the UK has got a more substantial investment in terms of the USC's marketing dollars. So I think they're ahead of us. So I don't know if it's exactly fair. Maybe it should be the UK versus Australia and New Zealand. Or maybe the next one should be Australia versus, say, the Philippines, which they were talking about doing an episode there. You could have Mark Munoz versus, I don't know, James Tahuna or something. If they were to do another continental show, or another international show with England, and maybe Maybe a European country. What about England versus Holland?
Yeah, that would be a good one, actually. They have more of a kickboxing culture, but I think they definitely have enough talent in Holland. What I'd like to see also is continents, so maybe North America, the United States and Canada versus Europe, the whole of Europe.
That's a good one. I wonder if you could parlay that into some sort of tournament style, where you've got TUF South America facing off against, say, TUF Asia, and then TUF TUF Europe versus TUF USA, and then the winner of those two shows get to have their own show. You know what I mean? Not the same fighters, maybe.
Yeah. Or you could just do a whole tournament with, do them all at home, and then each country brings their number one guy to fight in, and international kind of World Cup style tournament.
Like Street Fighter, the video game?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's get to the card. It's in the Gold Coast. I do want to say one thing really quickly. The Gold Coast, if you add the Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast, and Brisbane, which are all right there, together, you're getting about 2.5 million people. Sydney is the largest city in Australia, and that's at 4.6. The second largest city is Melbourne, and that's 4.2 million. But you can't fight in Melbourne, not in the octagon. You can do mixed martial arts, but if you do mixed martial arts inside of a cage, it's against the rules. Ridiculous.
Does it have to be a ring?
Go ahead.
Does it have to be a ring? Or?
It has to be a ring. That's exactly right.
Oh.
For some reason. Just has to be a ring. We actually talked with George Sotiropoulos about that a bit later. He does talk about some advocacy efforts going on in Melbourne. But it's ridiculous. Second largest city in Australia. A great international culture here with Europeans and the like. And we can't have an Ultimate Fighter finale. Anyway, let's just do a quick review of the prelims. We don't have enough time to go into every single fight. We'll really just cover the main card in detail. First fight, light heavyweight Nick Pinner versus Cody Donovan. Then lightweight, Brendan Longnan versus Mike Wilkinson. Welterweight, Ben Alloway versus Manny Rodriguez. Welterweight, Mike Pierce versus Seth Baczynski. That's going to be a good fight. Light heavyweight, Igor Pokrajic versus Joey Beltran. That should have some fireworks. Featherweight, Chad Mendes versus Yautsin Mesa. Now, let's get to the main card. We'll do the Ultimate Fighter finalists first, and then we'll talk about the coaches, and then finally what should be the most exciting fight on the weekend, in my opinion. Let's start with the lightweight. Colin Fletcher versus Norman Park. Colin Fletcher is crazy. Discuss.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think he's kind of accepted the fact that he's not a good-looking person, and he's kind of put on this whole freak show just to kind of help him along with that. That said, it gets him noticed as well. I mean, he's easily been the most recognisable fighter on the whole show.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, without a doubt. He's a very well-rounded fighter as well. He's mostly a striker. He likes to use his kicks and punches uses distance, because he's also a very tall fighter as well. That said, he can stop a few takedowns as well. Probably not from a US Division 1 wrestler, but he can stop his fair few, and his grappling's pretty standard as well.
The thing about Colin Fletcher, surprisingly, the guy's got 8 wins and 7 by submission. That's fairly unusual, I think, for a British fighter.
Well, I think it's just this new talent coming from the UK now. I mean, a lot of fighters, a lot of camps are able to bring in a few international fighters to train with them.
The other thing about Colin is he's 6'3" with an 81-inch reach. I dare say he's the largest lightweight in the UFC. He's huge.
Yeah, he's the John Jones of lightweight.
He practically is John Jones. John Jones is 6'4" with an 84-inch reach, and he's a light heavy. It's insane.
I know.
If you haven't seen Colin Fletcher, Google him. It's worth it. Trust me. Just go watch some of his fights and some of the smaller promotions. The guy's crazy. He literally looks like a character out of a Guy Ritchie film. He's crazy.
What's funny as well is during his ring entrances, in his past fights, he's come out in a tiny clown's bicycle, and he looks absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, he does. He seems to have the same fashion consultant as Insane Clown Posse. He's fighting Norman Park. Norman Park is a legit prospect. He's 16-2. He's from. Do you call them North Irish or do you call them Northern Irish?
Northern Irish.
Northern Irish. He's a Northern Irish guy. He has a background in judo. He was a freestyle wrestling champion in Northern Ireland. He's got 12 submissions. Surprise, surprise, this is a battle between two ground fighters coming out of England.
Well, I'd say Colin Fletcher's more of a striker from his past fights that I've seen, not in The Ultimate Fighter. So I consider it more of a striker versus grappler.
Who do you think wins?
Well, Norman Park is an excellent submission fighter. He's trained with Robert Drysdale. He has numerous amounts of submission victories from all positions: arm bars, leg locks, rear naked chokes, and guillotines. I think the guillotine is actually his most used ones. But in my opinion, I think Colin Fletcher is just too well rounded for him. I think he knows enough to escape the submissions. He's a very tall fighter. He has excellent grappling and excellent striking. So I'm going to go for Colin Fletcher.
Whenever you look at these TUF shows, you can't take a lot of value in the show itself, because this show was on a 3-day production schedule. And what I mean is every 3 days was an episode. So these fighters are fighting a lot, and they can't really train cardio. They can't really train full bore. They're only training 4 hours a day. They don't have time to game plan. So you kind of have to throw the show out the window when you actually get them into a proper camp where they can fight on a finale. But with that being said, whenever these shows come up, I tend to choose the wrestler. So I'm going to go with Norman Park on this one.
You're going for the Northern Irish?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to see a successful Northern Irish fighter in the UFC, I do have to say.
Well, we could have had George Best. From what I understand, when he wasn't playing soccer, he was drinking and kicking ass.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next one. Robert Whittaker versus Brad Scott. Now, Robert Whittaker is an Aussie, but like another Aussie fighter, he's actually a Kiwi, and he's got serious power. He's kind of in the same mold as Mark Hunt, except he's a welterweight.
Yeah. I mean, Robert Whittaker, he's pretty much finished most of his opponents he's fought with. I mean, and he's only been to a decision once, and that's a fight that he lost. So, I mean, he could be the Nick Diaz of a Nick Diaz-styled fighter. I mean, if he doesn't finish the guy, he's probably going to lose the decision.
Yep. He's got 9 wins, 4 by knockout, and 5 submissions. This guy actually, he's a young guy. He's 21, and he's been training in, quote-unquote, mixed martial arts since 2003. So he grew up as a mixed martial artist. So you can see that he's got well-roundedness. Now, on the show, he was KOing people left and right. Let's talk about his opponent, Brad Scott.
The problem with, on the show, Brad Scott went to pretty much decisions in all his fights, and they were very close fights as well. I think one of them was actually a split decision. But outside, he's been finishing his opponents as well. So, I mean, he's definitely shown that he can game plan on the show and just edge out the victory. But because he's finished opponents, I think he's probably going to take this fight from a decision.
I'm going to go with the Aussie on this one. I feel I have to, considering it's the only Aussie finalist. Let's talk about the coaches. George Sotiropoulos versus Ross Pearson. Now, George Sotiropoulos' fight between welterweight and lightweight, where Ross Pearson has fought from lightweight to featherweight. So surprisingly, in this fight, George is the bigger fighter. He's a little bit taller. He's got a little bit better reach. He's also a black belt on the ground, which is something Ross Pearson is particularly susceptible to. On Ross's side, he is more dynamic with his striking. Obviously, that's his forte. That's his bread and butter. So it's just a question of, can George get Ross to the ground? What do you think?
I don't think he will be able to. I don't think George has shown he has the wrestling to do it, and I don't think his training at American Top Team has given him enough time to learn striking to take on Ross Pearson. And that's my opinion generally. I mean,
well, I'd expect you to say that because you're a pommy bastard. I have to go with George on this one. I think he is more well-rounded, although Ross Pearson in the pre-fight interviews is saying he thinks he is. Ross Pearson is just a boxer, whereas George actually was an amateur boxing champion here in Victoria, and he's obviously got a brilliant pedigree on the ground, 8 submission victories, if I remember correctly. I think George will get him down. I think he won't be destroyed on the feet, and then he'll submit Ross Pearson because he is, like I said, the bigger, stronger fighter. I'm going to go with Sotiropoulos on this.
You say that, but he has been training with the Alliance camp, and they've got a very good number of wrestlers. Phil Davis, for one.
Guarantee you Ross Pearson was not sparring against Phil Davis.
Yeah, I know that, yeah. He's also been training with Dominic Cruz, who's the bantamweight champion. He has an excellent sprawl.
Not with one knee, he's not.
That's true.
We'll agree to disagree. You take your Brit,
Yeah.
I'll take my Aussie. Now, let's talk about the most exciting fight on the card. And arguably what I think will be the most exciting fight of the weekend.
And should be the main event as well.
Hector Lombard versus Husamal Palhares. Now, before we talk about this, I actually had a chance to talk to Hector last week. Let's play that interview now. Joining the Getting Lucky Mixed Martial Arts podcast is the former Bellator, cage fighting, extreme, and AFC champion. He is 31-3-1 with 24 finishes. Welcome to the show, Hector Lombard.
Hey, y'all.
When you joined the UFC back in April of 2012, you were one of the biggest mixed martial art free agents ever. But unfortunately, in your first fight against Tim Bosch, you came in with an injury. What was the injury and how did it affect you?
Yeah, my sternum was, I have a fracture in my sternum and I couldn't breathe properly. So that, was affecting my breathing and stuff like that. So, of course, it's kind of, was affecting my performance in the fight.
I saw that you, in one of the interviews, you stated that it really affected your training for up to 6 weeks before the fight.
Yeah.
After the fight, in the post-fight presser, Dana implied that you maybe should drop down to 170, but that's not an idea that you were very open to because you thought, I guess, at middleweight you were very happy here. Why is that?
I feel strong at the weight, and I didn't feel that I was getting tossed around or anything like that. I didn't feel that I was getting dominating at all, and I feel that I won the fight. Still, it wasn't one of my best performances, but I feel that I won the fight. Every single round, and I was pulling the pressure. Tim Bosch was just running away in terms of front kicks that didn't hurt me at all. But yeah, I feel strong after one fight, and I don't have any intentions to get up to 170 at the moment.
How do you feel now? How's your camp gone? Are you healthy?
Yeah, I'm very healthy. I've been training Australia. For the last 3 weeks, and I have a lot of friends that they've been coming to help me with my training and stuff. So the preparation is not an issue this time.
Your opponent, Husamal Palhares, he's actually one of the most feared middleweights because of those knee locks. Have you done anything in particular to try to counter that aspect of his game?
To be honest, I gotta tell you one thing. I don't think that the fight's gonna go to the ground. I feel that I'm gonna KO him pretty easy. But even if he goes to the ground, I feel safe. I have nothing to worry about.
Alan Belcher really laid out the game plan for countering him, and I guess if he can't take you down and he has to stand with you, he's probably going to be in trouble.
Yeah, that's 100%.
If Anderson Silva takes the GSP super fight and a title shot's not in the immediate future for anyone in the division, who would you like to fight that you think would be the most exciting matchup?
Well, I want to fight Michael Bisping. He's been talking a lot of rubbish. Yeah, those guys that, like Michael Bisping and the other guy, what's the name of these guys? Munoz. They've been talking a lot of rubbish. So, I would like to fight any of those two guys at the moment. They're the ones that I really want to fight. But I need to get this fight out of the way first.
What's your prediction for the fight with Toquinho?
My prediction for the fight is I'm gonna KO him no matter where we going, standing or on the ground or whatever. I feel that I'm a little faster than him, and I feel that I'm a little stronger than him, and I have to do it.
I'll get you out here on that. I know I got you right in the middle of a busy day. Be sure to watch Hector Lombard on the UFC on Fuel TV 6 card. That's December 15th in Australia, December 14th in America. Follow Hector on Twitter. It's at Hector Lombard. Hector, would you like to say anything to your fans before you go?
Yeah, I want to say thanks to my Australian fans, and I want to say thanks to all my Australian training partners that have been helping me, with my preparation, and I won't disappoint any one of them.
Sounds great. We're expecting fireworks. Good luck.
Thank you.
So, as you can see, Hector is extremely confident in his fight with Rousimar Palhares. He doesn't think he'll be taken down. If he does, he's not worried. He thinks it'll actually be a pretty easy KO.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think Rousimar Palhares has what it takes to generally fight the top division of middleweights, because he's submitted most of his opponents who are outside the top 10, and just every time he goes up to fight the top 10 fighters, he generally loses. And we kind of saw that in his fight with Alan Belcher as well. He couldn't submit him. They were rolling around on the ground, and once he knew Alan Belcher wasn't going to be heel hooked so easily, he just gave up pretty much, and Alan Belcher was able to secure the TKO victory, and I think that's what's going to happen as well with Hector Lombard.
Rousimar Palhares had a bit of a legend that was growing, and I think a lot of that myth, the fable of the dangerous tree stump leg locker, has been destroyed. When he fought all the way up, right before Belcher, he was 14-3. He was heel hooking people, knee barring people. Now, he lost against Dan Henderson, but he kept trying to fall into that little Brazilian trap when they were doing their exchanges. Henderson didn't go for it, and I think as a result, Rousimar was penalized from the eyes of the judges. Then he lost to Nate Marquardt, but he grabbed Nate's leg, and Nate pulled it out, and Rousimar inexplicably stopped and started complaining to the referee that he thought Nate had greased.
Yeah.
Nate punched him, basically beat him out from there. So he didn't really have a legitimate loss until he fought Belcher, and Belcher, a black belt on the ground, was able to stay completely in front of the submission attempts, and it was beautiful to watch. Even if you're not a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specialist or you don't have much pedigree in the sport, you can watch that particular match and see it for a beautiful little chess match as they stepped over, moved around. Alan Belcher was beautiful in that. And like you said, when Toquinho couldn't get his lock, he seemed a little bit flummoxed, and he lost in the first round. Now, let's look at Hector. Hector is an Olympic-level judo fighter. I believe he's a 4th-degree Dan in judo. And he's got his black belt under Conan Silveira, I believe. He's had it for 2 years. So he's also a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Physically, these fighters are almost identical. They're both around 5'8", 5'9". They're both really, really, really strong, stocky types. I think Hector might actually be right on this. I think he might get Toquinho right on the button and not have much to worry about.
And not only that, I think Hector's much stronger as well.
So we're both saying Hector Lombard. Well, that's the card. We'll be back. Tom will join me back next week to talk about the results of it. But before we go, I did have a chance to talk to George Sotiropoulos via phone interview. We got to talk for about 12 to 15 minutes. I do apologize. He was calling me on his cell phone from the United States. If you're listening to this on an MP3, I might suggest that you go over to our YouTube channel and check it out there, because I actually wrote out the transcript of his answer, so it's easier to hear. But anyway, without further ado, here is the Ultimate Fighter Smashes Australian coach, George Sotiropoulos. With us today on Getting Lucky with Robert Curtis, brought to you by WhatCulture.com and powered by a global network of fans on MMAShare.com, is the coach for the Aussie team of TUF Smashes. He is a former contestant on The Ultimate Fighter Season 6. He is 14-4 with 8 submissions. He has an upcoming fight on UFC on Fuel TV 6 against Ross Pearson. Welcome to the podcast, George Sotiropoulos.
How you doing, Rob?
Doing well. So I guess the first question is, how is it being a coach on The Ultimate Fighter versus being a contestant?
As a contestant, I was a lot more focused on myself, whereas a coach, I was focused on the entire team. I had 8 guys to think about and strategize for and train, and my focus was about the team as a group, not myself.
As the coach, you got to bring in your own trainers or your own coaches. Did you have a particular philosophy or a mission that you wanted to impart to these young fighters, knowing that you really only had them for a few weeks?
I brought in my boxing coach, Leonard Gabriel. I brought in a kickboxing coach, Nick Cara. I brought in a wrestling coach who was Nathan Coy, and another coach who was Charlie Blanchard. He was both a jiu-jitsu and wrestling coach, as well as myself. And I wanted guys who had an expertise in every area of the sport, who could really impart and share some knowledge with the team. So we had experts in every aspect of fighting who could help coach these guys, and I really wanted to focus on the details and the fundamentals of each martial art, and I really wanted the guys to be safe in every position and be able to just have more confidence and better defense, with respect to the different aspects of the sport.
How many hours did you have them every day for training?
We had the guys for twice a day for 2 hours at a time, so 4 hours at a time.
Does 4 hours, how does that compare to, like, say, what you're doing with your camp? Is that comparable, or was it less just because of the production schedule?
The production schedule does take, obviously have limitations. It's less than what I normally would do because, given the time we had to focus primarily on the martial arts aspects, and that's what my primary goal was. Whereas when, with myself, I do more conditioning. Leading up to a fight, but because of the fight schedule or the show's schedule, there was a fight every 3 days. So every 3 days would result in an episode, hence the 12 episode series. Given the fight training, there's a lot of conditioning in that with the wrestling, the grappling, and the striking. With sparring and the drills that we do, there's a lot of conditioning in that. But when I'm training for a fight right now, I do more strength and specific cardio training because I've got more time to prepare rather than a 3-day schedule.
At the start of the show, you said you were familiar with the Australian fighters really only by name, but now that you've gotten to train with them and see them fight, how would you assess the current state of Australian mixed martial arts based off of the local talent?
I think they're just as good as the British fighters. If you see the outcome of many of the fights, the Australians were more dominant in their victories than the victories the Australians didn't go to decision. They were either knockout or submission, and the Australians put a stamp on what they stood out with. Whereas the Brits, overall as a group had more victories, but there was more decisions. But that doesn't mean anything. I think overall it's the Australians are just as good as the Brits and are up there with many of the other international countries that compete in the sport.
For Australia to really produce top-level talent consistently, fighters that can fight in the UFC, what aspect of mixed martial arts do you really think Australia needs to develop domestically?
I would say wrestling and grappling. Wrestling and the grappling aspect on the ground. I definitely there's a striking aspect. Australia is as good as any other country. And we've produced a lot of great kickboxing fighters and many great boxers. But it's the wrestling and the grappling that I think holds back Australia, more so the wrestling than the grappling, but that's what I see. Where you look at the USA and they've got, I think the USA is one of the strongest wrestling nations on the planet because they have, high school wrestling or collegiate wrestling, in school programs, and that gives them a huge advantage. They have an advantage in that area because, you've had guys wrestling in school, second, third, fourth grade, and they go through to college. And the guys that are wrestling in college, they're at an Olympic level. Their American wrestler, the average American college wrestler is a very high international caliber wrestler, and that gives them a great foundation for MMA. And so that's the advantage they have. But then you look at the Brazilians, and they've got like great grappling, great ground fighting, and they've also produced an equal amount of champions or high level fighters. So yeah, I think those two aspects are fundamental to this sport. MMA is it's a striking and wrestling sport, or striking, wrestling, and grappling sport, and those three areas are imperative and fundamental to the success of any fighter.
You're originally from Geelong, and cage fighting is actually illegal in Victoria. You can fight in a ring, but not in a cage. Are you aware of any advocacy efforts that the UFC might be doing to try to get into Melbourne?
Yeah, they're trying to push a campaign to have the sport legalised, and there's an MP, there's a local MP, sport and recreation, John Aaron, who's trying to help push try to help move the ban of the cage. It's more of a rule rather than actual legislation. But he's definitely an advocate that's trying to help. It's just a stupid rule. It's holding back the state from presenting the opportunity of local fighters fighting in the octagon. It's also obviously there's a financial interest to the state that many people could benefit from. But when I see the thing I see, there's two aspects. Definitely the financial aspect and the opportunity for local fighters. Even myself, I'd love to fight back in Victoria in front of a Victorian crowd, and that would be definitely something I really look forward to doing one day.
As the coach of the first Ultimate Fighter that's set in Australia, in a way you've really become the face of mixed martial arts in Australia. Is that something that you're aware of? I mean, do you embrace being an ambassador for the sport over here?
I think it's a great title to have as a fighter and a professional. It's just something that I basically achieved through my success in the cage and fighting internationally for years. And I definitely I love the fact that I have that title.
Let's talk about your fight with Ross Pearson coming up. First off, how's your camp going, and are you healthy?
Actually, I had a great camp. It was very, very productive, and I achieved a lot in this camp. And I'm 100% healthy.
So you've arguably got the best jiu-jitsu in the division, and a lot of people may not realize this, but you're also an amateur boxing champion here in Australia. When you look at Ross Pearson's game, what weaknesses do you see? What holes do you really want to exploit in your matchup?
Well, obviously his grappling, I think, is his biggest weakness, but also he's actually got good takedown defense, but his takedown offense is questionable. We really haven't seen those two areas of his game. He hasn't really implemented those areas of his game, but also he's got a falling style of striking, and that's what he's known for. That's what he's stamped on his career. Basically striking.
What's your mindset going into this fight? Really coming off of a long layoff and some adversity in your career, how important is this fight to sort of re-get yourself back into contention?
It's very important. Regardless of the adversity I've had, every fight that you fight is as important as any fight, whether it's a title fight or whether it's the first fight of your career. Every fight's important. Winning is imperative, and that's the goal. And people make careers out of winning, not losing. And I made a career out of winning. So that's obviously that's a no-brainer.
Yep.
The past year or so, I obviously had some injuries, but it's something I've dealt with before. It's motivated me, and it's it's motivated me to train hard and get back to where I was. But obviously, I have a 5 to 7, 15 in Australia or 14 in the US, and that's my number one priority right now. My whole life is revolving around that date and that fight, and I've done everything to get myself mentally to that date.
George, thanks for coming on. Be sure to check him out on December 15th here in Australia or December 14th in America, UFC on Fuel TV 6. George, do you have anything you want to say to your fans before we go?
I really appreciate the support of all these trainers, the great fans, and hearing them cheer for me at all my fights in Australia has been very uplifting and motivating.
Be sure to follow George on Twitter at George Sots. That's George Sots. George, good luck on your fight, and thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Joining us for the second half of our tough, ultimate, dynamic, action-packed fireworks spectacular is the professor of pain, the expert in MMA math. He's your Huckleberry, Marcus Mitchell. Welcome to the show, Marcus Mitchell.
Thank you. The professor of pain. I like that.
You like that one? I thought you would. Mitchell is also a columnist on thebacksportspage.com. So we're going to talk about TUF 16, the finale, which was supposed to be Nelson versus Carwin, which was a much more compelling matchup. Carwin has arguably the best power in the sport. Carwin, though, as has been his recent history, got injured with a knee. Now he's out completely. So now it's Nelson versus Mitrione. We'll talk about that fight in a second. But one thing I did want to ask you before we get into the show, Mitchell, is this season abandoned the live format, and it went back to a taped format. And if it follows the same model that the Australian show did, that's an episode every 3 days. Do you think this works better, the taped version, than the live version? The ratings seem to indicate it does.
If they have an episode every 3 days, I think it could work, but my favorite season so far has been the live season.
Really? I thought that the live season sort of bled the drama out of the pre-fight footage. It kind of made it seem a bit irrelevant rather than this is the show. It almost seemed like the pre-fight package and you're just waiting for it to end so you can see the fight.
Yeah, it felt like that, but I'm not in it for the drama, personally.
So you weren't a fan of Tough Brazil, is what you're saying?
Lots
of crying.
No, there was a ton of emotion in that season, but no, I don't watch it for drama. I watch it for the fights to be interesting. And I thought those fights were interesting. I thought there were a lot of surprises throughout that season. I mean, I didn't expect Chiesa to win ever, and then he won the whole thing. So I preferred the live format, and I was a little bit upset when they said they were getting rid of it.
I agree with you, and I think one of the things that, and I talked about this when I interviewed Vince Pichel, who was actually an alumni off of that season.
Name dropping.
Yeah, heck yeah, man. I got a name drop, but I got Hector Lombard. I don't think the format of the show is really the best vehicle to select the best fighter in the UFC rather than it is to find the guy who's best in these sort of mini tournaments, because injuries and then not like even the coaches say that the fighters don't really spar very hard. They can't really train their cardio because they only have the production schedule allows for only 4 hours a day. So I think there's a future with the Ultimate Fighter as a franchise, but I don't know if they've found it yet.
I think they're still feeling it out. I think especially with the injury bug that's plaguing the entire thing, they're probably also afraid because this is their one big chance. And if they were to get injured in the tough house, that's it.
Yep.
So, you've seen it happen before. I agree with that. I agree with your assessment that it is like who can win a mini tournament, who can fight as many times in a couple weeks. But I think they should still keep feeling it out because, honestly, I'm not blown away by TUF yet.
Let's talk about this card.
Let's get to it.
This card is in Las Vegas. We don't have time to go through all of the prelims, so we're just going to read them out. This is actually a full card. It's got a Facebook and a Fuel TV prelim section before we get to the main card on FX. The Facebook prelim is Jared Papasan versus Tim Elliott. Flyweight. Lightweight is Mike Rio versus John Coffer. Bantamweight, Ruben Duran versus Hugo Viana. Going to the Fuel TV prelims, TJ Waldberger versus Nick Cantone. Lightweight, Vince Pichel, versus Rustam Khabilov. Bantamweight, Johnny Bedford versus Marcos Vinicius. Welterweight, Mike Pyle versus James Head. Now we get to the main card. And we talked about how the headliner was already mixed up, and I think it really takes a lot of the luster off of this as an event. But since we're getting 2 tough finales within the span of 24 hours, we really can't complain. The first fight is a featherweight matchup between Dustin Poirier and Jonathan Brookins. Dustin Poirier, I think, is probably the more legit prospect. Both of these fighters are pretty young. Dustin Poirier is only 23, but he's got a 12-2 record, and he's coming off a Fight of the Year candidate with the Korean Zombie.
Yeah, I fully agree that Dustin Poirier is the better prospect. It seems like when he's in the cage, he absolutely knows what he's doing. He's out there to hurt somebody, and he's got a game plan that he can work around. When he fought the Korean Zombie, that was a well-matched fight, and anybody going up the Korean Zombie is going to have some trouble. And I mean, it was a Fight of the Year, in my opinion. It's just that the Korean Zombie got the better of him.
The format of that fight heavily favored Chen Sung-jung because it was a 5-round fight. And if I remember correctly, after 2 rounds, it was pretty even. But once both fighters started fatiguing and the Korean Zombie went into Walking Dead mode and just started coming forward and throwing bombs, it became a different fight.
I think that when that fight in the first 2 rounds, like you said, I think that Poirier had it. And then, like you said, he did start to gas. And that's when Chen Sung-jung really started to come on.
One thing that Poirier has, I think, over Brookins is that he's got remarkable balance. He's fought 14 times, won 12, and in those 12 wins, he has 5 knockouts, 5 submissions. Brookins is very much a ground specialist. On the show on TUF, he was ragdolling dudes, like really, really dominant performances. He's got a substantial amount of submission victories, but since the show, Jonathan Brookins really doesn't look like the same fighter. This is a guy that fought Jose Aldo before he got onto the show, I think, in the WEC. Since the show, he's only 1-2 with losses to Eric Hawk and Charles Oliveira. Oliveira submitted him by anaconda choke. Is Brookins the same fighter?
I don't think so. And you're right, in the Tough House, he was taking people out. He's won 69% of his fights by submission, like you said, whereas his opponent is much more even with 42% knockout, 42% submission. So I think that Brookins has lost it a little bit since the house, and I think he's going to pay for that when he goes up against Poirier.
How are you predicting the fight ends?
I think the fight will end with Poirier winning by TKO, probably in the second. I think they'll feel each other out a little bit in the first, and Poirier will really bring it home in the second.
Yeah, I'm also going with a TKO, probably in the second round. Jonathan Brookins looks like he's really regressed with his stand-up. When he can't take someone down, he looks fairly rudimentary in his striking.
Absolutely. He's one of those fighters where when you watch him strike, you're like, how is he a professional?
Let's go to the next fight, a lightweight fight versus Melvin Guillard against Jamie Varner. Now, if I was Melvin Guillard's coach, I'd probably be a raging alcoholic because he's one of the most frustrating fighters. The guy has physical tools to rival any other fighter in the UFC. Physically, he matches up very well even with Benson Henderson, but he just has this history, this trend of doing the most stupid things he can do at the worst times. When he's fighting grapplers, Joe Lozon and Jim Miller, the guy dominates on the feet and then throws flying knees, gets taken down and choked out. Now, even with that being said, he had a bounce-back victory versus Fabricio Camões, but then he fought Donald Cerrone. And this is where I think Melvin Guillard is starting to completely lose his mind. This is a fight that Melvin Guillard you would expect to do favorably in because Donald Cerrone is going to strike with him. But Melvin Guillard came in, he missed weight, he came in at 157.5, and then he got KO'd in 76 seconds. This is why I think Melvin Guillard's trainer should be on suicide watch.
I think exactly what you said, that against Cerrone when he came in, you're right, it was going to be a strike fest, and I was afraid that Cerrone was going to stand with him and get taken apart as he did against Nate Diaz. But then all of a sudden the head kick comes up, and out goes Guillard's lights. I don't understand how you train this guy. It seems like he doesn't listen to anybody. He had Greg Jackson in his corner earlier in the career, and then he left. Now he's with the Black Zillions. I think he needs to get away from the Black Zillions and get with a coach who can mold his mind. He has all the tools. He's got all the talent. He has all the experience for such a young fighter. He just needs to put his head in the game to be a contender.
If Greg Jackson can't make him a tactical fighter, can anyone?
No, I know. If Greg Jackson can't make your brain say, I need to win however it is I need to win, who else can?
Flying knees.
Right.
Jim Miller and Joe Lozon, the guys who can only beat him on the ground.
Get away from the Blackzilians. That's not helping.
I know the Blackzilians have been a little bit maligned lately for giving up, the back and rear naked chokes, but I think a lot of that is solely on the shoulders of Melvin Gillard. You take him out, they're probably average in that area because he just is a sucker for it. Let's hop over to Jamie Varner. What do you think about him?
I like Jamie Varner. I think the little dip in his career, I think that kind of makes you root for him coming back. He's that kind of guy that always comes to bang. He always comes to fight. I think when he fought Benson Henderson, everybody remembers his major quote. He just wanted to fight, and Henderson wanted to hug. But he always comes to fight, and I think that is going to be a problem here against Gillard.
And just like Dustin Poirier, Jamie Varner is extremely balanced. 20 wins, 9 by knockout, 9 by submission. Now, those 9 submission wins, I think, is what's going to undo Gillard.
Yeah, if Varner's got a head on his shoulders at all, he's going to go, look, I know how to submit a guy. Obviously, Gillard doesn't, and he doesn't know how to defend. That's what I need to do. But I'm afraid that his pride is going to come in and say, I'm going to knock this guy out because everyone thinks he can't be knocked out.
So you're definitely pulling on a personal level for Varner. Who do you think wins?
I think Gillard takes it. I think Gillard takes it very, very early, too.
So you think big knockout power, flash knockout, round 1 KO from Gillard?
Yes, he has something to prove after getting knocked out by Cerrone, and I think he's going to prove it against Varner. Varner, like I said, he took the little dip in his career, and he was on the swing back. Then he lost to Joe Lozon, and now I think he's going to go back into the downturn.
I'm going to say Jamie Varner will win this because I think he's got a good ground game. 9 submission victories is obviously a big plus on the resume. The thing that I like about Varner against Gillard is Varner's never been knocked out. And that's the only way that Gillard can win, unless he sort of outpoints him. But I don't see this fight going to a decision. I think this will be an exciting fight, and I think Varner will get it by submission in the first or second.
Absolutely.
Next fight, this is actually a bit of a novelty for us because I don't think in the last 4 cards there's been a heavyweight fight. So now we have the return of the heavyweights.
Oh, wow.
LeVar Johnson and Brendan Schaub were supposed to fight last time, but they got pulled off because of an injury. So here we go, heavyweights. But funny enough, we sort of get a true heavyweight in Shane Del Rosario versus a guy pretending to be a heavyweight, 5'11", Pat Barry.
Yeah, the only reason he's a heavyweight is because of those thighs. He can kick the head off of somebody, but that's about it.
Pat Barry has a bad record versus tall strikers, and he's surprisingly a little bit chinny.
Pat Barry has a bad record overall.
Well, 7-5.
Well,
but he got knocked out versus LeVar Johnson. He got knocked out against Czech Congo. He got stunned by Crow Cop and then choked out. And I have bad news for our guy, Pat Barry, and that's that Shane Del Rosario is 6'4" and a good striker. He's the only American to ever win the WBC Muay Thai Heavyweight Championship. How do you see this one going?
I think what you have to do is you have to look at the records and you have to look at the striking behind them. Sure, Pat Barry can come to fight and Pat Barry can strike with just about anybody, but he does get caught more often than not. You have an 11-1 fighter coming off a loss going against a 7-5 fighter who's also coming off a loss. If you get beaten by Tim Hague, you're going to have problems in your career, and it's only showing that Pat Barry's having problems. I like Pat Barry. I like the fact that in this fight, other than their heights, they both look very similar in the face, almost as if Pat Barry would be the shorter brother of the two of them.
It's this kind of cutting-edge analysis that we expect from the Professor of Pain. Yeah!
The similar facial structure lends itself to Shane Del Rosario, and I think that's scientific science.
In the podcast on that note.
Just break my computer, we're done.
I think Shane Del Rosario will win as well. He's got height, he's got reach, and he's obviously got the striking pedigree that seems to have been a bit of an Achilles heel for Pat Barry lately.
How do you see this fight playing out? We both see Del Rosario winning. How do you think he's going to win?
KO. Probably third round.
What kind of KO? Head kick?
I see just punch. Maybe he stuns him and then pounds him out.
Okay. I mean, I obviously, well, they're heavyweights. I see somebody gassing. I wouldn't think it would get that far. I think Del Rosario is going to catch him in the first round.
If all of your predictions are true so far, then this will be a hell of a card. Let's go to the TUF finalists, welterweight Colton Smith versus Mike Ritchie. Now, before we get into these fighters, I just want to say I've done a little bit of research. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. I, too, do research.
He has Google.
Yeah, that's right. The biggest indicator of who's going to win a TUF finale has nothing to do with the show itself, but rather how many professional fights the fighter has had before coming on the show. If you take the last 6 seasons, going back to the Ultimate Fighter heavyweights, the fighter simply with more fights, doesn't matter what the record is, the fighter with more fights has won the finale 88% of the time.
Wow. Who was the loss?
The only person to upset that was on TUF Brazil's Mutante. Cesar Ferreira beat Sergio Moraes. At that point, it was very close. Mutante had 6 fights and Sergio had 7. Now, here's my trivia question for you, Mitchell. If Colton Smith, with 4 professional fights, beats Mike Ritchie with 9, he will not be the fighter with the fewest fights that would have won the Ultimate Fighter. Who is the Ultimate Fighter winner that has had the fewest professional fights before coming on the show?
Ooh. Fewest professional before coming on to the show. I'm going to take a stab at it and just guess and say Michael Bisping.
Michael Bisping had 10 fights.
Way off.
Way off. In fact, not even close. The guy with the fewest fights was Amir Sadala. He was on the Rampage vs. 4 season. Guess how many fights he had?
Well, if he had less than 4, let's go with 2.
None. He did not have a single professional fight. He beat C.B. Dalloway in the finale, and C.B. Dalloway was 6-0. So for that very reason only, I'm taking Mike Ritchie in this fight.
Because of his record.
Because he's got 9 fights,
right.
And Colton Smith has 4.
You're basing the entire thing off of your math. And I, as you would expect, am going to totally agree with the math.
Yes.
I think Ritchie takes it. However, I'm a little skeptical. I very badly want Ritchie to take it. But you have in Colton Smith one of those, I'm from the Army. I am in the Army. All I do is Army. And after a while, that's a little bit taxing, but those guys tend to be great fighters. You have Brian Stan, you have Tim Kennedy. They know how to win fights. Even if it's not always the most exciting fights, again, Tim Kennedy, they know how to win fights. And I think that Colton Smith is forced to be reckoned with here. I'm pulling for Ritchie, but I think Smith has a legitimate chance.
Randy Couture, also ex-Army.
Randy Couture is just badass in every way.
Yeah, so. Oklahoma State wrestler. You're wanting Ritchie to win, but you're picking Colton?
Yes.
Regardless of who wins, do you think either of these guys has a long-term future in the UFC?
I think Ritchie does. Ritchie. I think he does. I see them taking Colton Smith and saying, hey, we're going to bleed off the fact that you're an Army Ranger. I don't see him ever getting to any type of a title fight. I think that you could see big things in Ritchie's future.
Another fun fact for you. The last season of The Ultimate Fighter to produce a fighter that actually fought for the title is season 5. We're now on season 17 coming up.
The last? Okay.
And those fighters were Manny Gamburian, Gray Maynard twice, and now Nate Diaz. You have to go back to season 4 to find a fighter that fought for the title and won. That was Matt Serra's, century greatest upset over GSP.
And if you go back to season 1, you'll find Kenny Florian, who is actually fighting for a title every other day. That's
right. Kenny Florian, Forrest Griffin. Obviously, the most successful TUF alumni is Rashad Evans.
Correct.
From season 2. I think there's a little bit of spectacle in this fight because it's the TUF finale, but I don't expect much of these two guys, to be honest. I think the welterweight division in particular has been mined so thoroughly that there's not a lot of talent out there that's been allowed to develop, quote-unquote, organically. The next season needs to go light heavyweight because that division is dying a slow death. Let's talk about the heavyweight matchup between Big Country Roy Nelson and Meathead Mitrione. That has to be one of the greatest nicknames of all time.
I liked Titties for coming from the same TUF season. So
that season had a lot of good, like Marcus the Darkness. That was another good nickname.
Rampage was all over it.
Yeah, Titties.
Good thing he never materialized anything.
That guy is probably polishing a high-powered sniper rifle with a name of people on it right now as we talk.
Lucky Rob is on it.
Yeah, unlucky Rob, if you listen to what Tom says about me. So Roy Nelson versus Matt Mitrione. This has absolutely not a single element of drama to it. There's nothing compelling about this matchup to me at all.
This is a letdown.
Yes.
This is absolutely a letdown. But these men were on the same season of TUF together, weren't they?
Yes.
I forget, were they on the same team or were they on opposite teams?
That I can't tell you. Amir Sadala. What? What are we talking about? Maybe it's trivia fiction.
I think that the only bit of drama that you can drum up for this after that Carwin is out, which is a gigantic letdown, is that you have two fighters who were on the same team in the TUF House. Mitrione did not win, whereas Roy Nelson did. Mitrione did make himself a bit of a career off of TUF.
He certainly did, and I think he's gotten a lot further on that TUF experience than he probably warrants with his skills. Mitrione, he fights like a silverback gorilla. He just, big clubby hands, not any striking defense, worthless on the ground. And he's fighting a guy in Roy Nelson who has a chin. No, he has a face made of cement.
He does.
With rebar.
And that's why I was hoping to see him fight Carwin. I wanted to see how much further he could take that. Because can you ever imagine ever in your life seeing a guy like Roy Nelson crumple like Chuck Liddell did from Rashad Evans?
Yeah, or what Carwin did to Frank Mir in the clinch with the dirty boxing.
I think Carwin would be the guy to do that to Roy Nelson, and that's why this is a letdown.
It is a letdown. Now, Roy Nelson has power in his hands, too, and he obviously is a really legit Buddha belly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He's going to take Mitrione down and submit him, probably in the first round.
I don't disagree with that at all. I think, again, if Nelson's thinking in any way, and I think Nelson's a very smart fighter. I mean, if you recall in the TUF episodes what he did to Kimbo Slice, I mean, why wouldn't you do that? Take him down and just pitter-patter his forehead and basically say, look, I'm going to give you a noogie for 5 minutes a round on national TV, and there's absolutely nothing that you can do to me. I think he would benefit from doing the same thing to Mitrione. If you look at Mitrione, all he wants to do is stand and bang. He's fought Marcus Jones, Kimbo Slice, Joey Beltran, Tim Hague, Christian Warcraft, and Chet Congo. Of those 6 fighters, do you see a name or did you hear a name that doesn't want to stand up and fight? No, Beltran, that's all he does. Warcraft, that's why you know his name. So I think that a fighter coming in against Mitrione that wants to take him down is something he hasn't experienced yet and something he's not going to know what to do with. He's
been protected, let's face it. He's been protected from a grappler.
He has. I think that he was also in the running to go over and fight Cormier when they needed an opponent, and didn't he back out?
Oh, yeah, and it was smart. Cormier would have roadhoused him. I used to fuck guys like you in prison. Let's talk about Roy Nelson for a second, because he was kind of going under a career renaissance. I think it was just after the Frank Mir loss, when Dana really gave it to him about being out of shape, about not taking his career seriously. He's people's champion, but he'll always be the lovable loser. And Roy Nelson started dropping weight, considerable amounts of weight.
He put it on Facebook.
He put it on Facebook. And when he came to weigh in, I think for the Crow Cop fight, he actually had his shirt covering a fat pad to hide what his body looked like. And then when he got in the ring, he looked a lot skinnier. Now, I think it was the Verdum fight and the Herman fight, it seems like he's abandoned that weight loss and he's just coming back to heavyweight. Do you think he's got any potential at heavyweight?
I think he's like a Pat Barry. He's a spectacle. He's somebody you want to see fight, but he's somebody you know is not going to threaten JDS or Cain Velasquez or any of the top names. I don't think he's somebody that I would even want to see across the octagon from Alistair Overeem, just for his sake, for his safety. So he's not one of those fighters that, I think he's going to be anything, but I do enjoy watching a Roy Nelson fight. And I think something that Dana doesn't understand is that the casual fan wants to see that guy do well, wants to see a dirty, grubby, gigantic-bellied guy going in there and knocking out a guy with the physique of a Mitrione or a Frank Mir when he's in shape.
Roy Nelson, 6 foot tall, 254 pounds. If he cut down, just say 220, and then use that to cut water and everything for a weigh-in, do you think he could compete in the light heavyweight division?
No, I think he can't. I think he'd be the same fighter in a different division.
I don't think he'd beat John Jones.
No.
But as we said, the light heavies are old. In fact, if you go and look at the Sherdog top 10, half of them are sort of these relics from Pride. Guys like Rampage and Shogun, etc. I think he could do really well against fighters like that with his Renzo Gracie black belt, his huge power, and the fact he'd be fighting against guys with less power than the guys that can't knock him out at heavyweight. I think he could be more of a legitimate draw. No one in that division is beating John Jones. No one that we've seen. Not Alexander Gustafsson, not Machida. Rashad is legitimately the number 2 light heavyweight, and we saw what happened with him. It wasn't close. But Roy Nelson needs to get his tubby bum down to light heavy.
I think that he's also on the back end of his career. Roy Nelson is. He is 36. He's 36. Guy you mentioned, Shogun, is only 31. Sure, he's clearly declining, but he can still put up a fight. I think also you have to realize that Nelson, for a heavyweight, has very, very short reach. For a light heavyweight, he still has short reach at 73 inches. So, again, just to compare him to Shogun, 76 inches for somebody about the same height. So, I think
I know where you're going with this, Mitch.
And that
you're
is?
Thinking middleweight.
Well, if he could just get down that extra little weight to bantam, he may be able to do something with that power. But no, I don't think he'd be a contender. I think, again, he'd just be a spectacle, and I'd much rather see him at heavyweight doing what he's doing than at lightweight wasting his time.
You just want to see a fat, bearded redneck take a ton of damage. That's what you want to see.
You know what? I didn't like seeing him fight Dos Santos. I liked him continually coming back, but it was just, somebody get in there and stop it, because his heart's not going to let him stop it, so he's going to keep coming forward. I don't want to just see him continue to get beat up. I want to see him throw that haymaker right like he did to Brendan Schaub each and every time he steps in there.
JDS has a history of making me want to turn off fights. Like what he did to Shane Carwin, that's like something, like if Jason takes his mask off, that's what you would have seen. That was about as putrid of a face at the end of the fight as I think you'll ever see. Well, that's the card. I'm picking Roy Nelson. I think you're picking Roy Nelson.
I'm going with Roy Nelson. I hope that he goes ahead and takes Mitrione down. But, I wouldn't hate to see Roy Nelson go ahead and land that haymaker on Mitrione's chin.
I would too. I'm not a big fan of Meathead. Check out the 2 TUF finales. The TUF Smashes is on December 14th in America. The TUF 16 finale is on December 15th, Friday and Saturday. We'll be back next week to review all the action. Tom will join me for the TUF Smashes, and Mitchell will join me for the TUF 16 finale. Check us out on whatculture.com. They've got movie news, video games, sport, everything you want to see there. Also, a shout out to all of our friends at MMAshare.com, a global network of fans. Look for us on iTunes, subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Lucky Rob. Also look for us on YouTube. Mitchell, you want to say goodbye to the people?
Absolutely. I just wanted to go ahead and say MMAshare.com, easily the best MMA forum on the entire internet.
For life.
For life.
Congratulations, Mitchell. I popped your Lucky Rob virginity. How did it feel?
I don't know if you broke the hymen, Rob.
Oh, really? I'll have to go deeper next time. All right. See you guys.
Get, 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 3つの